Next up, we have my friend Aaron, who's going to talk to us about Evergreen DevOps. And I don't know if Aaron updated their, oh yeah, they did update their avatar. For a while there, we had a wrong picture, but now it is better. So please welcome Aaron, and let's listen to what they have to say.
Hello. Hi. I think Heidi's referring to the fact that I've since debearded since the last picture that was presented. So I guess if you don't have a video of me, that's what I look like as a cartoon. So yeah, we're talking about Evergreen DevOps. These are the lessons that I've sort of found consistent with DevOps that haven't changed every year at open spaces. They seem to be like the same conversations we're having over and over again. I could have done a bunch of really good Animal Crossing backgrounds, but we had just had a whole conversation about branding at work, so I was trying to make it conform there. But then also none of my fonts came through. So we got neither, but it's all right. We're going to adapt and overcome. We're gonna still have the presentation. So this was originally done as sort of a retrospective on DevOps days, and as kind of at least the most conference about DevOps. There's at least the most of them in the world, I'm pretty sure. It started initially with the origin story of DevOps days, and I'm sure Maddie can correct me at some point when I get it wrong, but roughly at an Agile conference, open spaces, maybe not an Agile conference, but at an open spaces, Andrew Clay Schaefer put forth this topic of like, what if Agile operations? Like, what if we applied these concepts to ops and maybe DevOps and this thing going forward? They didn't have the name yet. Didn't show up to his own proposed open space. One other person did, who was Patrick Dubois, and then the next year they were like, hey, we actually have something, and started the first DevOps days in 2009. And what's interesting is these events have kind of grown since then, from 1 in 2009 to 80 in 2019. There were 80 different DevOps Days events around the world, and these aren't like marketing efforts by a company to put forth. These are all volunteer-run conferences that are grassroots to the cities they operate in. Like, the people that run it are from that city and care enough about DevOps to start their own event. Something happened in 2020. I don't know if you all remember. A small pandemic. But what's interesting, like, they didn't go away, right? Now, there were some that still happened before, like, the pandemic kicked off, but that was only about March. I ran DevOps Days New York City that was March 2nd and 3rd, and that was threading the needle on whether or not we should have done that. But all these things kept happening virtually. Like, people still cared enough about sharing this community, about continuing to like, talk about DevOps, that everything went virtual. People started having these online events and, like, figuring out, what does this look like if all of our assumptions about a conference go away and change completely? And here we are starting to show back up in person, and, like, we're back to the same number of events roughly as 2017, somewhere around 50. Like, that's wild to me that this didn't go away. This pandemic happened and people weren't like, I'm over it. We're ready. Like, we want to get back to it and continue to have this community. And this makes sense to me. So I first went to a DevOps Days in 2016, which is 6 years ago, which both seems like I thought it was yesterday and I thought it was eons ago at the same time. So I'm not really sure how to cope with the fact that it was both only and already 6 years ago. I went to a DevOps Days in Denver for reasons. I'm originally from Connecticut, so it doesn't really make sense, but we'll just not worry about that. But I fell in love with this style, like, especially these open space moments where we got to really talk to everyone who was there, like, no longer just listening to people on stage, but actually have interaction and conversation. And so I tried to do these things at home, and it just sort of ruined the rest of my life in all the best ways. I was just like, I could sysadmin, I could be content to go home and not worry about whether or not I was running 3 more events or where I had to go the rest of that year, but now here I am. So I'm a developer advocate for Equinix. If you care about provisioning bare metal through APIs and networking through APIs on, like, network backbone, talk to me later, because this talk won't talk about that. But I ran the DevOps Days Hartford events for a few years. Like I said, I helped out the last DevOps Days New York City, and when Boston went virtual, I started helping them run production and try to get their events online and see what they could do to continue their community throughout the pandemic. And now I do like podcasts too, so some shameless self-promotion. I'm one of the rotating panelists on Greater Than Code, and we're doing the Traceroute podcast that's all about like the people and infrastructure behind the internet. It's super neat, and you should check both those out. I'm wearing the shirt for maximum promotion of Traceroute. Yeah, I just wanted to point it out. I don't know who can see what, so I feel like the need to, anyway. So as I was collecting information for this talk, I remember, I've run enough of these open spaces, you remember like how many things come up over and over and over again, but I wanted to get sort of more historic trends. Like I knew everything now, we have to talk about Kubernetes at some point. Like if we don't talk about Kubernetes, I'm pretty sure you get kicked out. But like I remember when it was just Docker or Docker Swarm or just like, what is a containers? Or like, how do we manage our virtual fleet? Like that all stuff happened before. Like this Kubernetes thing is kind of new. It's not really core to what DevOps is. It's just the current technological implementation of all of this. And like CI/CD pipelines too, like those are still around, but remember when everyone needed to know how to Jenkins, and then everyone needed to know how to stop Jenkinsing because they were stuck too deep? And now, look, we had one about Argo CD recently, like Tectons, another CI/CD pipeline, Circle CI, whatever people are using, right? There's all these tools that have changed. So Jenkins wasn't DevOps despite how ubiquitous it felt. Ooh, man, this preview slide is tiny. I'm gonna have to turn around. So, oh yeah, config management, right? So if it wasn't CF Engine, was Puppet, Chef, Ansible, what's the right way to manage our fleet? And now we're like, actually, we don't really care about the computers. We're gonna write stuff in Terraform and Pulumi and argue about the correct way to provision stuff in the cloud directly. So yet again, everything just shifts and moves forward technology-wise, which is why, like, as much as we love technology talks, we keep having these interpersonal conversations because it just keeps happening. Monitor all the things. We wanted Sensu and Nagios, and that was alerting us. And then how do we manage those alerts? Through PagerDuty. Like, oh, we actually want all of our logs centralized, so let's build the Elk stack. And actually, we don't care about any of that. And Prometheus is going to do our monitoring. And really, we should be doing distributed tracing and observability anyway. So now all of that is a different conversation. It just keeps like shifting. The technology always moves forward, and that's clearly not the thing to learn about DevOps. That's just sort of the technological soup that we swim in. But this slide I sort of see every time, although I haven't seen the Pink Floyd The Wall of Confusion joke before, so I'm a little upset no one got to that before me. Again, the fonts would have really helped, but it's okay. This is sort of core, and every time we talk about DevOps, this slide will come up, talking about how we have these two communities of developers and operations who have had this separation or silo built between them where they no longer communicate back and forth to each other. They're not building a single community, but live in their own silos. And all the conversation has to go up and down the stack on either side. They communicate across the wall in tickets, and like our goal was to break down that wall, build the communication between them, and build a single goal in mind, right? I'm going to align on our outcomes. What are we actually trying to do, rather than the opposed, like, I want to make innovative change, and like, please don't break my systems. SRE is like this other emerging thing that I think gets more at the practice of what's under the hood and why it's kind of stuck around as it's been talked about. And so site reliability engineering is SRE, but I kind of put the S off to the side because there's this resilience engineering that's kind of just under the hood too that I think is really all about it. And at the core of all of this dives into the fact that the resilience, the reliability, everything that's trying to keep our systems up and running isn't this additional thing that you build, but it's inherent to the systems that we're creating already. It's about the adaptive capacity of the systems that we're building. And because our systems are not just like a bunch of technology that we leave alone, but involve all the humans, that's why we talk about socio-technical systems all the time, that's where all this adaptive capacity comes from. I'm going to reference a talk that I think I am stuck referencing in every time I talk about resilience for the rest of my life now. The recently passed Richard Cook gave this amazing talk that talks about how bone is the archetype of resilience. Not just like a good example, but like quintessentially what you should think about when you think of resilience. First off, bones break and knit themselves back together. That's just a thing they do all the time. They're naturally resilient. And so when we set bones, when we learn how to like make them heal better, we're not doing anything special except creating the ideal conditions for all of those systems already in place to do what they naturally do and adapt to the changing circumstance. And the way they do that is they have all these systems, like in our bone, we've got all these cells that signal each other and tell them, hey, I need more bone cells, or hey, connect to this over here. We don't have to send that up to like our brain's central management and be like, yeah, you know what, I think we should heal my leg right now. I think that would be a good move. It's driving all of this decision-making process. Everything that's happening is right at the site, the sharp end of the system, where all the action actually takes place. We don't have to understand precisely how those resilient mechanisms work. We just have to understand how to improve the conditions for them to get better. There's another half of it that talks about like actually manipulating those systems of resilience themselves, but you should watch this talk to get all those. It's from Redeploy 2019. It's the opening keynote, and I could watch it over and over again. It's really, really good. So I think what ties into that too is Conway's Law. We talk about how organizations build systems that look like their own communication structure. So DevOps is really trying to, I think, get at the core of this thing, right? It's not about how we need to use the correct tooling in order to deliver microservices, but about how we need to culturally shift how we operate so that we can actually support those, right? Instead of building these big monolithic organizations, if we actually have to break down our systems into groups and teams that are loosely coupled but have high signaling between each other, that have the ability and are given the authority to actually like act on the systems to keep them up and running, which keeps all of our services running. Like that builds the resilience into the system. This is DevOps that we're trying to actually enable. And again, it's not about like the tools here, and it's not about just really big, robust systems that are impervious to damage, right? Like, so again, a thing happened in 2020. The COVID happened, kind of shut down. I just like the sign, the world is temporarily closed. It's kind of what it felt like. Everything just stopped. Everyone went home. And the organizations that did the best weren't the ones that were just so big that their employees didn't have to go home, right? That wasn't a thing that happened anywhere. Everyone was affected. The people that did the best focused on what those employees were saying and doing and needed at the time. We actually focused on the people. It was about changing with the times and not about trying to do business as usual. What I struggled with most were organizations that tried to recreate the office experience, but you lived at home. And so it was like, I think someone else mentioned it, a water cooler Zoom. You had the meeting Zoom. You had the just hanging out to work Zoom. You had the after work beers Zoom. It was like, speaking of the world's longest webinar that never ends and just goes to different rooms, right? Like it wasn't effective because it was a different thing. You have to be intentionally different when you're dealing with remote stuff. So being able to adapt to what workers needed rather than trying to just push the same thing, expecting that capacity changed, that parents had children that were home that also had no idea that was going on, taking energy away. Like all of this had to be addressed rather than just try to push forward as if nothing has changed and we could just ignore it. So this is another talk that I give that talks about my, speaking of talks that are hard to talk about, right? This one is kind of directly about me and my mental health and how some of these concepts have allowed me to like process that in a different way. So I'd given this talk before the pandemic about sort of the lessons that I've learned, and I was asked to give it again after the pandemic, and I thought, oh, I'm gonna have to like, maybe I'll have to update some things here. But what's interesting is I really didn't, because the lessons that I learned about this that were all about that resilience were about like creating error budgets, which are all about allowing failure to happen and learning from it rather than, you know, oh, it failed, we must change and do something different. Or, you know, just the concepts of how we need to have observability and understand all the different things that are going on in our systems. Like all that continues to ring true, more so after this pandemic rather than like less than before. I think all of this is because it like continues to be this interconnected thing, right? This tendency to like try to tack words onto DevOps feels like it missed the. Naming is hard, like naming and off by one errors are the biggest problem in tech. And like, I think that's what we always end up with, is we called it DevOps because we had dev and ops, these very obviously problematic relationship that should have been like a restored community. And then everyone else was like, well, I want to be part of that too. And like, well, yeah, that's the point. The point is we want all of you to be involved in this process. The point is building these connections and rebuilding all these loosely coupled systems together so we can work towards common goals. the concerns, whether they're from development or ops or security or finance or biz or whatever it is, all matter towards driving the system forward. It's intersectional concerns, right? Whether it's dev and ops or socio and technical systems, it's about where all these things intersect and come together. Well, and if that's true about like just the business side of it, and we're talking about this true about the people, like this continues to connect further. There's sort of something interesting that like these events always have a code of conduct. That's sort of something interesting. And I love the code of conduct for this event because it's the same as all the DevOps days, I'm pretty sure. I don't know if it was directly taken from there, but it looks very similar. And these code of conducts are interesting that we even have these at a tech event, right? Because what we're saying is we have certain values about the people that are involved here. And we need that to be represented. We need everyone to be allowed at the table if we're going to understand their concerns and actually move forward in a way that helps people. That's sort of the difference in this DevOps movement. Wasn't that it was about how to tech more efficiently, but how to tech in a way that actually cares about the people both doing that job and the people that are consuming the technology that we actually build as well. It starts to care more about the humans involved in the system. Because I mean, why are we doing it otherwise? I think there's this tendency, especially now we hear of like, you don't want to talk about politics at work, or people say things like that, but I think it's important to. I'm not going to read this quote directly, but unfortunately technology is a power multiplying force by itself. And so it matters where and how we apply technology and how we build and operate our systems. And so we have to care about the people involved. Like the code of conduct is important because we need to care about trans rights. We need to care about whether or not people are allowed to do things with their bodies that they want to do, and whether or not Black Lives Matter all matter to DevOps because it matters to the people involved in DevOps. And if we miss that, we miss the point. These DevOps events didn't grow because like technology is neat. These DevOps events grew because we cared about the people involved and we cared about the change and how we were approaching this technology, that it wasn't just approached as in, hey, what's the hot new feature in this tech this year? Yeah, it's about uniting these two sides. It's about surviving like the end of the world. Because for me, I had a really hard time during the pandemic personally. Like this took a real toll on both my mental health and my strength through all this. And what got me through it wasn't like existing systems or structures or policies, but was all of the people that I had met through all of these DevOps times that I could lean on, all the communities that I had built that helped me get me through it. That's what helped us change and adapt to everything that was going on. So if I had to summarize it, which I did once before I was supposed to give this talk, but then got COVID and couldn't give the talk, so that's a different story. It's all one movement with multiple on-ramps. Like any corner of DevOps, like we're talking about development, operations, SRE, we're all aiming at the same things. If you want to build better, more resilient socio-technical systems, you have to build strong and inclusive communities that leave no one out, except for everyone else trying to make other people's lives miserable, right? Like it's all about working together towards those common goals. So thanks. This is thanks for my rant. You can find me online at Crazy. My slides should be in that QR code. Hopefully everything's working correctly. And some minor shilling for Equinix. I think we do a fairly good job at some of this. Every company is a company, but if you want to work for me and other people trying to do cool stuff, follow that or let me know.
Every company is a company. It's true.
Most definitely.
We're stuck with that one. Yeah.
Thanks for that amazing talk. It definitely is like nice to be able to recap what the entire DevOps movement has been throughout the last few years. Like, I think I didn't get started until 2017 of knowing more about DevOps days and such.
Yeah.
So it's kind of nice to see like that now, like with the events coming back in 2022, like things are coming back. And I mean, these are all in DevOps. Like we got folks in person and we got all of you tuning in live. And I really loved how you ended that on like the community aspect of it, where I know I like shared about it publicly too. Like going through the entire pandemic, it was like, but we all had our friends on Twitter, our friends in DevOps, our Slacks, our Discords.
Sorry, I'm slow because I just read something on the Discord that made me make the pun face. It's like the whiskey face, but with like less Maddie Stratton said at the beginning of DevOps history, we would have called it Etsy Ops.
Oh, no.
Yeah.
Yes, Maddie, show yourself out.
So one of the things that I was thinking when you were talking, Aaron, is do we have this written down somewhere so that we can like parachute it in on people who are starting out? I think this is a really interesting sort of reflection on the like what happens when you crash on DevOps Island. Well, it turns out that there is a lot of existing history, and how do we like as a community communicate that?
There's probably a transcript of this somewhere now, but I don't know that there's like a written history
we don't
of,
have a
of
DevOps
Do we have like
wiki?
an oral history of DevOps or whatever it is? But I think that's a good thought, like trying to capture this. Well, and this is sort of the concept too, right? Is we also run into this challenge of we also, as much as we have 13 years of DevOps, we have 13 years of you can't buy DevOps, but you definitely have a number of companies trying to sell it to you. And right, competing with that marketing noise is always a lot of the challenge. Competing with the like, you know, DevOps is not an engineering title, but like, I mean, it will get you 50 grand, so maybe it is an engineering title. I don't know. I don't know what the balance is of trying to. Yeah, I don't know. I think we should. We should have something that continues to drive it like, hey, the heart of this thing is the heart, right? Isn't just the tools that you're throwing out there or the process change that you're getting.
Yeah, if we are going to be a movement that identifies itself as inclusive, we have to say these are the things that we include.
Yeah.
So I think it's an interesting project, and we'd love to hear from people in the hallway track or in the speaker Q&A if there's stuff that a bunch of us nerds keep saying and you don't know what we're talking about. We'll add that to the list of like, oh yeah, terms that we automatically use all the time.
It's kind of weird that like there is no such thing for DevOps, because I'm like, we kind of do have some like for SRE.
I have some words about DevOps and their feelings about documentation, as you know, Bob. For everyone who doesn't know, I came to this after 20 years of technical writing, and DevOps is the most YOLO bunch of jerks about actually writing things down.
Well, I feel like we might be putting together some folks that might be interested in this. I think Maddie mentioned he wanted to share more of the oral history of DevOps and tuning into what companies were doing. But I think it's also kind of like setting it up as like you can't really set up a structure of DevOps without being inclusive and like making sure you're building a continuous learning aspect of it, because the entire aspect of it is learning and collaboration. Like going back to comms.
Yeah. So there's a question.
Yeah.
It says, lately I've noticed quite a bit of pushback on people trying to learn more about, on ops people trying to learn more about DevOps to the point of telling them that they should retire.
What?
What? Okay, everybody in the room just went, what? But I think it is a thing. If you come to DevOps from dev, you don't exactly understand the pain and utility of what the ops people have been doing all along.
Yeah, so I'm sorry, the question was saying ops is being discouraged from jumping in, which is so weird to me coming at it now, like, is definitely at least the opposite of that what I've experienced. And I think a lot of it was a number of ops folk trying to say there's got to be a better way of doing this, like where DevOps kind of grew. What attracted me to it, right, was because like, hey, the way we're doing it now is painful. There's got to be a better way, and like finding DevOps as this unifying force was really empowering there. So I'm sad to hear that ops folks are being discouraged from participating, and I have heard it, I guess, in sort of the more like elitist corner of like, well, if you're not learning to code or you don't already know these tools, or how come you're not already deep into the Linux cycle and you're coming from Windows Enterprise admin, that's ageism, right? Like a lot of this is ageism. Like you've been doing this forever. You're old news, right? But like all of this should be learning. Like it's meeting people where they're at and trying to bring them in. And yeah, sometimes that means like, we've got to go teach you the basics of how to use this thing again. Like that's why I love back to basics talks that remind us like under the hood of all this huge complex thing are still the basic stuff we've been doing. Like it's still protocols from the 70s and 80s that are running all of our software and getting our bits across the internet. So it's not that different, just different applications.
fundamentals don't change. And I think sometimes we forget that, like especially when you're coming into.
Yeah.
Well, with that, thank you so much, Aaron, for all the knowledge and for all the discussions that are now happening due to this.
Yeah, the chat is lighting up, so feel free to join us on the Discord if you aren't already. If you're on the Twitch, the Discord link is going to pop up right now, and we are going to start the next talk in just a couple moments. So see you soon.